In the early 1930s, something interesting was happening in the Soviet Union. The world was between big wars. World War I had ended not too long ago, and World War II was still on the horizon. Many countries were gearing up, expecting another conflict might come. The Soviet Union wanted to build stronger military forces, and part of that plan was to create a better tank, something more powerful and reliable than what they had before. Before we get into the details, let's talk about some key players. One important person was Mikhail Koshkin. He was an engineer with a knack for designing things. Koshkin led a team at the Kharkiv locomotive factory. Their job was simple in theory but challenging in practice: design a tank that could defend the Soviet Union in case of war. Koshkin had some solid ideas on how to make a tank that would be fast and could handle tough conditions. So what happened? By 1937, Koshkin and his team were hard at work. They started designing a tank that would perform well on different terrains. This tank needed to be able to move swiftly and still have enough armor to fend off enemy fire. The development had its ups and downs. The team faced many technical challenges, especially when it came to balancing speed and protection. One major step was testing the tank's armor. It had to be thick enough to deflect enemy shells, but not so heavy that it slowed the tank down. The solution? Sloped armor. This helped ricochet enemy shells off the tank, almost like how a water slide throws you off if you go too fast. Another technical marvel was the tank's wide tracks. Wider tracks spread out the tank's weight better, which kept it from sinking in mud or snow, a crucial feature given the harsh conditions of the Soviet landscape. But not everything was smooth. There was pushback from some military officials who preferred sticking to older tank models. Koshkin had to convince them that his design was the way forward. He took a prototype on a long test drive from Kharkiv to Moscow, proving its reliability over hundreds of kilometers. This journey was a game-changer, showing that the tank could withstand rough conditions and long distances without breaking down. The first T-34 tanks rolled off the production line in 1940. By the time World War II erupted in 1941, these tanks were ready for action. During the war, the T-34 played a massive role. It surprised the German forces with its speed and strength, making it a critical player in battles like the one at Kursk in 1943, which was one of the largest tank battles in history. The results were significant. The T-34 became an icon of Soviet strength and resilience. It was so effective that it continued to be used long after the war ended. You could say that this tank helped to shape the outcome of World War II in the Eastern Front, giving the Soviet Union a fighting chance against the invading Nazi forces. Why does this matter to us today? The T-34 stands as a symbol of innovation under pressure. It reminds us that with teamwork, creative thinking, and determination, big problems can be solved, even in tough times. The principles used in designing the T-34 still influence tank design today, showing the lasting impact of engineering done right. By learning about the T-34, we get a window into how technology and history can intertwine, shaping the world as we know it. In the late 1930s, as tensions rose in Europe, countries began preparing for a conflict that would soon engulf the world. The Soviet Union knew that if war broke out, their tanks would need to be tough, reliable, and better than anything the enemy had. This led to the birth of one of history's most famous tanks, the T-34. One key figure in this story is Mikhail Koshkin, a talented engineer who led the team designing the new tank. Koshkin and his engineers had one clear goal: create a tank that was both powerful and easy to produce. This wasn't an easy task, especially with limited resources and time. The T-34's story starts with its new design. The tank had sloped armor, which was a game changer. By angling the armor, it increased the chance of enemy shells bouncing off instead of penetrating. This simple but smart idea made the T-34 much harder to destroy than other tanks. Inside, The tank had a diesel engine. While this might not sound special now, at the time, it was a big innovation. Diesel engines were more fuel-efficient and safer than the gasoline engines used in many other tanks. This meant the T-34 could travel further on less fuel and had a lower risk of catching fire if hit. The T-34 also had wide tracks, which helped it move over rough terrain without getting stuck. This was really important on the Eastern Front, where muddy and icy conditions could stop other tanks in their tracks. Koshkin and his team faced a lot of challenges. The biggest problem was building the tank quickly without compromising quality. Factories had to learn new methods to produce the T-34 efficiently. There was also the challenge of training soldiers to use and repair this new kind of tank, often with little time or resources. In 1940, just before World War II escalated in Europe, the first T-34s rolled out of the factory. As the war unfolded, these tanks proved their worth over and over again. In battles, they often outmatched German tanks, causing the enemy to adjust their strategies and designs. The T-34 had a lasting impact on tank warfare. With its combination of innovative design and practical engineering, it set a new standard for what tanks could be. The speed of its production and its effectiveness on the battlefield showed how important smart engineering was in modern warfare. Today, we care about the T-34 not just because it was a great tank, but because it represents a turning point in military technology. It shows how creative problem-solving and engineering can make a real difference, even in something as complex as warfare. The lessons learned from its design and production are still studied in military academies and engineering schools around the world. In short, the T-34 tank was an engineering marvel of its time. It combined smart design, innovative technology, and practical solutions to overcome its challenges. Its legacy lives on, reminding us how smart engineering can change the course of history. In the late 1930s, as the world was getting ready for another big fight, the Soviets were busy designing something new that would shake things up. This was a time just before World War II, and everyone knew that having the best technology could mean the difference between winning and losing. The Soviet Union needed something tough and powerful to face their enemies, especially after seeing how quickly the Germans moved with their advanced tanks. One of the key people in this story is a guy named Mikhail Koshkin. He was the mind behind the T-34 tank. Koshkin and his team wanted to build something that could survive on the battlefield, and they worked really hard to make it happen. They aimed for it to be strong, fast, and easy to produce so that many could be built quickly. The T-34 made its mark during World War II around 1941 when it first rolled out to fight against the German army. Before it showed up, tanks were either really slow and hard to move or fast but weak. The T-34 mixed the best of both worlds. It had sloped armor, which means that its surface was angled to deflect enemy shots, and that gave it better protection. Plus, it had a powerful 76mm gun that packed a punch. Now, let's break down how it worked. The T-34 had a diesel engine, which was less likely to catch fire than the gasoline ones used by other tanks back then. Its wide tracks helped it move better across the muddy fields common in the Russian landscape. Imagine trying to walk across a muddy field in sneakers versus boots. The T-34 was the boots. It was designed to handle the rough terrains of Eastern Europe. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The crews working these tanks faced plenty of challenges. For one, it was really cramped inside. If you think of your family car packed with everyone and some luggage, you're getting close. Add the stress of being in battle, and you can see why it was tough. Plus, communication was tricky. Radios were not always reliable, so sometimes tank crews had to rely on flags and hand signals. Despite these problems, the T-34 became a game changer. The Germans were shocked at how effective it was. They actually tried to come up with new tactics and weapons just to handle the T-34. This tank was produced in huge numbers with more than 30,000 made during the war. That number alone shows its importance. It helped the Soviet Union push back against the German advances and played a big part in many Soviet victories. So, why should we care about the T-34 today? Well, it represents a point in history where technology and strategy came together to change the course of events. It taught the world about the value of combining good design with mass production. Even now, if you look at modern tanks, you'll see the influence of the T-34. It's a reminder of how innovation can make a real difference when faced with tough challenges. In short, the T-34 wasn't just another tank. It was a new breed of warfare that helped shape the outcome of World War II. Through clever design and a lot of hard work, it left a mark on history that is still studied and respected today. In the early years of World War II, the Eastern Front was a tough battleground. The German army, with its blitzkrieg tactics, had swept across Europe and invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. By 1943, the Soviet Union was pushed back but not defeated. They needed something to turn the tide, and a big part of their comeback was the T-34 tank. At the start, the Germans seemed unstoppable. Their tanks were among the best in the world. But the Soviet Union had been developing something special. The T-34 was designed by a team led by a man named Mikhail Koshkin. He wanted a tank that could handle the harsh Russian winters, move quickly, and outgun the enemy. The T-34 had sloped armor, which made it harder for enemy shells to penetrate. It also had a 76.2 millimeter gun that could destroy German tanks at a long range. Its wide tracks helped it move over mud and snow without getting stuck. When the T-34 first appeared on the battlefield, it surprised the German forces. The tank was fast and tough, and it took some time for the Germans to figure out how to deal with it. In July 1943, one of the biggest tank battles in history happened at a place called Kursk. The Soviet Union used many T-34 tanks in this battle. While the Germans planned a massive attack to break through Soviet defenses, the Soviets knew it was coming. They had built strong defenses and used the T-34 tanks cleverly to stop the German advance. Even though the T-34 was a game changer, it was not perfect. The early models had issues with crews being cramped inside, and the visibility from inside the tank was not great. There wasn't much protection for the crew if the tank got hit. Also, communication can be tough because not all tanks had radios. However, the T-34 was produced in large numbers, which made a big difference. The Soviet Union could build these tanks more quickly than the Germans could destroy them. This was important because the war on the Eastern Front was about numbers as much as it was about strategy. The Soviet Union produced over 50,000 T-34s during the war. As the Soviet Union began to push back the German forces, the T-34 played a key role. By the time the war ended in 1945, the tide had truly turned. Berlin fell to the Soviets in May, marking the end of the war in Europe. The T-34 had helped the Soviet Union hold off the Germans and then go on the attack, a crucial part of the Allies ultimately winning World War II. So, why does this matter today? The T-34 changed the way people thought about tank design. It showed the importance of having a balance between armor, firepower, and mobility. Modern tanks still use some of these basic ideas. Beyond technology, the story of the T-34 is about resilience and innovation during one of history's toughest times. For the Soviet Union, it was about finding strength against an overwhelming force. Understanding how this tank helped shape the course of World War II helps us appreciate the strategic challenges and innovations that can turn the tide in any conflict. In the heart of the Second World War, a powerful machine emerged on the battlefield, the T-34 tank. It was 1941, and the German army was advancing deep into the Soviet Union, causing huge problems for the Soviet forces. They needed something strong to push back, and that's when the T-34 came into play. Designed in the late 1930s, it was set to be a game-changer. The man behind this tank was Mikhail Koshkin. He was the chief designer at a Soviet tank factory, and he had a big idea. Instead of just improving old designs, Koshkin wanted a completely new tank. It had to be tough, fast, and able to fight on harsh terrain. The Soviet leadership was convinced that Koshkin's plan could work. They gave him the green light to go ahead. Building the T-34 was no easy task. The team was under pressure to work quickly as the threat of German invasion grew, but they managed to create something remarkable. The T-34 had sloped armor, which made it harder for enemy shells to penetrate. It was equipped with a 76.2mm gun, providing serious firepower. Its wide tracks meant the T-34 could travel over mud and snow, something many other tanks struggled with. Working inside a T-34 was like being in a metal box. It could get very hot, and the noise from the engine was loud. The crew, usually 4 people, a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a loader, needed to work closely together. Communication was key, but in the middle of an intense battle, it was tough. The cramped space and the shaking of the tank meant everyone's job was hard, demanding full focus and teamwork. Despite its strong design, the T-34 had its share of issues. At first, factories struggled to make enough tanks, as materials were scarce and workers were pushed hard. Maintenance was challenging too. Mechanics had to fix tanks on the front lines using whatever they could find, which was not always enough. Plus, some early models had mechanical problems, like breaking down or catching fire. Just being a crew member had its dangers, as getting hit could easily lead to injury or worse. But overall, the T-34 proved its worth. It played a key role in many victories as the Soviet Union pushed back against the Germans. This tank showed that with a smart design, it was possible to overcome some of the worst situations. Factories eventually found ways to build the tanks faster, and improvements were made to make them even better. The T-34 became a symbol of Soviet strength and resilience. So, why does this matter now? The T-34 wasn't just a tank, it was a symbol of innovation under pressure. It showed that thinking differently and adapting quickly can turn the tide in difficult times. Its legacy lives on even today, as it influenced tank design around the world and was involved in conflicts long after World War II ended. For someone wanting to understand how technology can change the course of history, the story of the T-34 is a perfect example. It reminds us that smart thinking and determination can make all the difference, even in the toughest times. In 1941, the world was in turmoil. The fighting in Europe had reached a boiling point. Germany was advancing quickly, using their blitzkrieg tactics, which combined fast-moving tanks with air and ground forces. The Soviet Union found itself in a dire situation, as these tactics were proving tough to counter. This is where the T-34 tank comes into play. The T-34 was about to become a game-changer on the battlefield. The T-34 was designed by Soviet engineers who wanted to build a tank that could withstand enemy fire and still pack a punch. Two of the key people behind its creation were Mikhail Koshkin and Alexander Morozov. Koshkin led the initial design at the Kharkiv locomotive factory in Ukraine. Sadly, Koshkin did not live to see his tank in full-scale production, but Morozov took over and made sure the T-34 became a crucial part of the Soviet strategy. When you think about a tank, you might picture a big armored vehicle with a giant gun. The T-34 was exactly that, but it had some unique features. It had sloped armor, which meant that enemy shells were more likely to bounce off instead of penetrating. It also had a powerful 76.2mm gun that could take on enemy tanks. Plus, it could move fast and handle tough terrain, which was especially important in the vast landscapes of the Soviet Union. Soldiers who fought with the T-34 often had mixed feelings about it. On one hand, they appreciated its armor and firepower. On the other hand, it was not always easy to drive. Soldiers faced many challenges in these tanks. The interiors were cramped, and the ride was rough. Communication was another problem. Early models of the T-34 did not come with radios, so crews had to rely on flags or even hand signals to communicate. This was tough in the chaos of battle. Despite these challenges, the T-34 proved to be a huge asset. In battles like the one at Kursk in 1943, it played a key role. Kursk became the largest tank battle in history, and the T-34s were at the heart of the Soviet defense. Even though Germany's tanks were technically advanced, the sheer number of T-34s and their effective tactics overwhelmed them. Thanks to its success on the battlefield, the T-34 helped to turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. It became a symbol of Soviet strength and resilience. The tank was used not only in combat, but also as a source of morale for the Soviet troops. It showed them that they could stand up to German advances and even push them back. So why should we care about the T-34 today? Well, it was one of the first tanks to combine speed, firepower, and armor effectively. This combination set a standard for modern tanks and influenced designs for decades. The stories of the soldiers who fought in these tanks remind us of the hardships and bravery involved in warfare. By understanding these experiences, we can better appreciate the sacrifices made during World War II and the innovations that came from it. In sum, the T-34 was not just a machine, it was a vital part of history, helping to shift the balance during one of the toughest times in the 20th century. Through the eyes of the soldiers who operated them, we catch a glimpse of human resilience and the relentless drive for victory. During the late 1930s, as tensions in Europe rose, countries were gearing up for what would become World War II. The Soviet Union realized they needed a better tank. Their old models were not ready for the kind of battles that were coming. This pushed Soviet engineers to start working on a new design. Little did they know, they were about to create one of the most famous tanks in history, the T-34. The key figures behind the T-34 were two main guys, Mikhail Koshkin and Alexander Morozov. Koshkin was the head of the design bureau in Kharkov, a city that is now in Ukraine. He was the visionary who led the design work. Morozov, on the other hand, focused on the technical details. Together, they were a great team. They started by looking at tanks from other countries and seeing what worked and what did not. Their goal was to build something faster, tougher, and with more firepower. In 1937, they started designing the T-34, and by 1940, the first prototypes were ready. This new tank had a 45mm sloped armor that could deflect most enemy shells. It was powered by a strong diesel engine, which was more fuel efficient and less likely to catch fire than gasoline engines. The T-34 also packed a 76mm cannon. This was a big deal, as it could take out most enemy tanks of the time. But it was not all smooth sailing. Koshkin and Morozov faced lots of challenges. The Soviet leadership wanted the tank to be perfect, which meant a lot of testing and changes. The first test run in the winter of 1940 was tough. The prototypes had to endure thousands of kilometers through snow and mud. This was no easy task, but it showed where improvements were needed. By the time Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, the T-34 was ready for battle. Early on, it proved to be a game changer. The German soldiers were shocked by how tough it was to destroy. Its armor was like a shield, and its cannon was powerful enough to knock out even the best enemy tanks. The T-34 was also much faster, which allowed Soviet forces to hit hard and get out of dangerous situations quickly. Because the T-34 performed so well, it became the backbone of the Soviet armored forces. It was reliable and easy to produce. Factories soon began turning them out by the thousands. There were still challenges to overcome, like shortages of materials and skilled workers, but Soviet industry learned to adapt. The tank kept improving too. By 1944, a newer version with an even bigger 85mm cannon came out, making it even more deadly. The impact of the T-34 during World War II was huge. It helped turn the tide in many battles and played a major role in the Soviet victory against Germany. But why should we care about the T-34 today? Well, it teaches us a lot about innovation and adapting to challenges. When engineers come together with a clear goal and determination, they can create something that changes history. The T-34 did just that, and even today, it is remembered as a symbol of strength and smart thinking. During the late 1930s, Europe was getting tense. Countries were building up their armies, preparing for possible wars. In the middle of all this, the Soviet Union needed a new tank that was both strong and fast. They were looking for something that could handle rough terrain and face enemy tanks head-on. A few smart engineers were given the job, and what they came up with was the T-34 tank. One key person in this story is Mikhail Koshkin. He was the lead designer who wanted to make a tank that could be mass-produced easily, but was also effective in combat. Koshkin and his team at Kharkov, a city in present-day Ukraine, began working on the design around 1937. They looked at different features from other tanks and combined them into something new and unique. Their main idea was to have a tank that was simple, tough, and reliable. By 1940, they had a working prototype. The T-34 had a lot going for it. It had thick armor that was angled, helping deflect bullets and shells. It was powered by a powerful engine that let it reach speeds of up to 34 miles per hour, which was fast for a tank back then. Its main gun was a 76.2mm cannon that could pierce enemy armor at a good distance. All these things made the T-34 a formidable opponent on the battlefield. When World War II kicked off, the T-34 was put to the test. Soviet soldiers faced challenges like harsh weather and muddy roads, but the T-34 proved capable. It could drive through snow and mud better than many other tanks. However, there were problems too. Some tanks broke down, and the crews often lacked proper training. Despite these setbacks, the T-34's design allowed it to keep going where other tanks might fail. One of the biggest challenges was building enough of these tanks quickly. The Soviet Union needed hundreds, if not thousands, of them to fight the German army. Factories worked around the clock to produce as many T-34s as possible. It was not always perfect, and quality sometimes took a back seat to quantity. Even so, the numbers they produced helped the Soviets hold their ground and eventually push back against the Germans. The T-34 made a big difference in battles like the Battle of Moscow and the Battle of Kursk. These successes showed how important a well-designed and well-produced tank could be. By the war's end, the T-34 had become the backbone of the Soviet Army. So why should we care about this old tank today? Well, the T-34 changed how tanks were designed and used. Its simple but effective design set a new standard for armored warfare. Many countries, including in Asia and the Middle East, used the T-34 even after World War II was over. Plus, it showed how important good engineering and smart design are in creating effective machines for military use. The T-34 became a legend on the battlefield because it was a mix of good design, toughness, and sheer numbers. It helped change the outcome of World War II and influenced tank designs for many years. This legacy of steel still echoes today, reminding us how technology and innovation can shape history.